March 3rd, 1974. 12,000 feet above the fields east of Paris. The McDonnell Douglas DC 10-10, tail number TCJAV, call sign Turkish 981, rides a shallow climb, its 3 General Electric engines thrumming like a cathedral organ. A pale winter sun slants across the cabin. Coats rustle, trays click. 100 conversations fold into the white hiss of air over aluminum. In the cockpit, Captain Nejat Berköz settles the jet on departure, a quiet hand on the yoke. To his right, First Officer Oral Ulusman reads climb checks. Behind them, Flight Engineer Erhan Ozer watches needles, fuel flow, pressurization, everything in the green. The aircraft's name, Ankara, is stenciled on her nose, a promise of strength. For now, she feels untouchable. The morning has been busy. Orly's ramp bustled. Ground staff swapping cargo nets and baggage cans through the wide, outward opening doors that make this new generation of airliner so efficient. A rugby club squeezed jackets into overhead bins. A pair of first-class passengers clinked glasses while the rest of the cabin, packed tight row after row, settled into the humdrum of a short hop to London. You can still picture it. The glow of reading lights, a steward's practiced smile, the metallic tang of brewed coffee sneaking down the aisle as Paris fell behind them. On the engineer's panel, cabin altitude stabilizes. Pressurization differential building exactly as the manuals say it should. The DC-10 systems are modern elegance, a pressure controller that thinks faster than any human. Hydraulic packs that purr, triple redundant routes for control. Still, the crew rides that thin edge all aviators know, the one between smooth and chaos, while they monitor climb thrust, call for flaps up, watch indicated airspeed creep toward schedule. Then the airplane coughs. It's not a noise you'd recognize if you've flown 1,000 times. It is a thunk, distant and hollow, like someone dropping a steel bar into a drum somewhere aft. It comes, and then the world ends. The rear cargo door lets go. It is instantaneous and it is violent. The cabin tears into white fog as moisture in the air flash freezes into micro-ice. A thunderclap of air punches through the fuselage, and the pressure differential between inside and outside resolves itself the only way physics knows: by trying to suck the inside out. Floor panels aft of the wing buckle upward, seat tracks rip free, a ragged hole in the belly becomes a mouth. Masks fall like pale fruit. A scream becomes a chorus, becomes a gale. People grab armrests, grab each other, grab nothing. Paper hats, blankets, and prayers rip forward into a single screaming wind. Up front, the nose pitches, subtle at first, then more. Berköz feels it in the bones of his hands before the instruments catch up. He pulls, instinct and training meshed into one smooth motion, eyes flashing to the attitude indicator, then to airspeed, then to the vertical speed needle which has begun to sag. Ulusman's hand is already on the trim wheel. Ozer's fingers stab for the pressurization panel and the hydraulics. But the airplane isn't listening. Beneath their feet, the floor beams over the aft cargo hold have bowed and snapped. The control cables that run to the tail, the ones that carry their commands from yoke and wheel to elevator and rudder, have been scythed through like violin strings. The jet is no longer a negotiable partner. It is a body with its spinal cord cut. At 23,000 feet, Turkish Airlines Flight 981 is no longer flying. It is falling. Not a dive in the way a pilot means it, not a controlled descent, but a convulsion through thin air. The DC-10's nose is down 20 degrees, airspeed climbing beyond 400 knots, faster than any configuration was designed to bear. Control surfaces on the tail, useless dead appendages, flutter in the slipstream, begging physics for mercy. Captain Berkos holds the yoke fully aft, the column trembling in his hands as though the airplane itself were alive and resisting. Beside him, Ulusman calls out their altitude, his voice flat now, steady because emotion would only waste oxygen they may not have. 17,000. The ground rushes toward them invisibly through crystal air. In the cabin, time has lost its sequence. Some passengers are pinned against their belts. Others float against the ceiling as the airplane oscillates, bouncing on its own destruction. The rear pressure bulkhead is gone. The aft cargo compartment, once filled with luggage and sound insulation, is a wind tunnel leading straight into the sky. Through it, the roar of the atmosphere pours into the fuselage like the ocean into a sinking ship. Fragments of carpet and insulation whirl through the aisles. Seat mounts fail one by one near the rupture, rows collapsing as the floor breaks from beneath them. In the space below, control cables hang slack and severed, waving like black grass in the gale. The pressurization system tries to compensate, automatically feeding more air into an airplane that is now wide open to the stratosphere. Oxygen masks flutter uselessly against faces. There is too little time for hypoxia to matter. At Paris control, the radar return is dropping. 30,025, 2017. Controllers exchange glances. They had heard the first broken transmission. Mayday, May, and then static. Now they watch the green dot fall off the scope like a dying ember. One controller radios again, voice careful, as though tone might hold the airplane together. Turkish 981, radar contact lost. Say intentions, silence answers. Inside, the cockpit shakes so violently that the instruments blur. Warning horns overlap. The stall alarm, the overspeed clacker, the master caution. The DC-10 is confused. It's both too fast and too unstable, trying to tell the crew a dozen things at once. Berkos forces himself to breathe. He knows there's a way to fly with engines alone. He'd practiced it once, in a simulator. Differential thrust. Power up the left engine to yaw the nose right. Throttle back the right to roll left. Try to level her using raw thrust imbalance. It's desperate, but it's all that remains. Left engine idle. 2 and 3 max. The engineer complies. Power surges through the nacelles, a deep, guttural howl as if the airplane herself were screaming. For an instant, just an instant, the nose rises, the vertical speed needle slows its spin. But then aerodynamic forces reassert themselves. The left wing flexes, metal groaning under loads it was never meant to endure. Rivets stretch, panels ripple. 6,000 feet. They are passing through the last clouds, sunlight flashing through the cockpit as the forest below comes into view. A tapestry of green and black, motionless and waiting. In the forward galley, a flight attendant braces herself between carts, watching coffee pour sideways. She's 26, and she had taken this route because she wanted to see London again. Behind her, a man in a business suit clutches his briefcase like a talisman, as if papers could protect him. Berkos knows what is coming. He is not a man given to panic. He spent 20 years flying military transports, another 10 on civilian jets. He has lived inside the arithmetic of flight long enough to recognize when the sum no longer works. He scans the instruments one final time. Hydraulic pressure 0. Elevator response none. Airspeed pegged at the limit of the dial. Brace for impact. The phrase is procedural, but in that instant it's also a kind of prayer. The DC-10's left wing fails first. It doesn't break cleanly, it tears. The metal peels backward from the root like a flower opening in reverse, the upper skin shredding under G-load and aerodynamic torque. The jet rolls violently, almost inverted, the right wing slicing into the air like a blade. Inside, the cabin becomes a centrifuge. Passengers are thrown sideways, ceiling panels implode. In the final seconds, the engines scream past redline. The vertical stabilizer fractures, the tail section folding downward as the fuselage begins to disintegrate. To those inside, there is no clear moment of impact, only an unbearable crescendo of noise, pressure, and white light as the Ermenonville forest rises to meet them. At 12:40 p.m., Turkish Airlines Flight 981 hits the ground at more than 400 knots. The sound rolls across the trees like thunder trapped in a box. The explosion leaves no flame column, just a widening crater and a ring of splintered pine. The largest recognizable part of the airplane is scarcely larger than a door. For a moment, there is silence again. Then from miles away, hunters and farmers begin to run toward the smoke. At first, those in the nearby villages thought it was an earthquake. Windows rattled, dogs howled, and a distant roar rolled across the French countryside. When they stepped outside, the horizon above the Ermenonville forest was gray and trembling. Then came the sound, a low, sustained crackle that wasn't thunder at all, but trees breaking, thousands of them crushed and torn. Within minutes, the first rescuers reached the edge of the forest. The smell hit them before the sight did. Kerosene, burning plastic, and the sharp, metallic scent of shattered earth. What they found inside was beyond words. The DC-10 had disintegrated on impact, 200 miles per hour of kinetic energy pulverizing steel, flesh, and soil into a single pattern of devastation. The aircraft had entered the forest nearly level, but its structure had already been compromised. It tore itself apart in a spray of wreckage half a mile wide. No survivors, not one. All 346 souls aboard, passengers and crew, were gone in an instant. It was the worst aviation disaster the world had ever seen up to that moment. Even the investigators who arrived hours later would later admit there was no airplane left to speak of. Only fragments. Captain Berkoz's wristwatch was found stopped at 12:41 p.m. Nearby lay a flight manual, scorched black, its pages fused together by heat. The cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, had been thrown hundreds of meters from the impact site, but miraculously its magnetic tape survived. So too did the flight data recorder, its orange casing dented but intact. Those two small boxes would become the only witnesses to what really happened at 30,000 feet. French gendarmes cordoned off the area as bulldozers carved narrow paths through the debris field. They marked fragments of fuselage with numbered stakes, one for every piece large enough to catalog. A passenger seat here, a hydraulic actuator there, shards of the distinctive Turkish Airlines livery half buried in soil. Trees still smoldered. The crater itself steamed in the cold afternoon air. Back in Paris, the news broke slowly, almost disbelievingly. At Orly, relatives waiting for the return flight saw the sudden freeze on the arrivals board. Retardé, then annulé. Journalists clustered by the terminal windows. Officials whispered about a possible crash, then about no survivors. Turkish Airlines representatives stood in shock. In London, Heathrow staff cleared the arrival gate that would never open. Investigators from France's BEA and the American NTSB were on scene before dusk. They had been here before, figuratively, if not literally. Just 2 years earlier, another DC-10's cargo door on American Airlines Flight 96 had blown open in mid-air over Windsor, Ontario. That airplane had survived by sheer luck and skill, limping back to Detroit with a gaping hole in its fuselage. The design flaw had been known then. A fix had been promised. Now, as engineers in heavy coats crouched over twisted aluminum in the cold mud, that promise lay broken among the wreckage. The next morning, they found the cargo door itself. It was nearly intact, half buried, its locking pins still retracted, never fully engaged. The latch handle, meant to be flush when locked, had been forced closed despite misalignment. A simple act of leverage had overridden the safety mechanism, bending a crucial link inside the locking system. When the cabin pressurized, the door's latches held for a few minutes, just long enough to reach cruising altitude, before the pressure differential exploded it outward, tearing a hole large enough to destroy the airplane's control system. A maintenance error, yes, but more deeply a design failure disguised as innovation. McDonnell Douglas had been warned. The outward opening door saved space and weight, but relied entirely on perfect mechanical alignment and human precision. And in aviation, perfect is a dangerous word. Families gathered in Paris and Istanbul. Coffins arrived draped in flags. The Ermenonville forest became a cemetery without gravestones. French villagers left flowers at the nearest road where pieces of fuselage were still being recovered weeks later. The sound of chainsaws lingered for months as investigators combed through trees for every clue. When the official report was released, it was damning. The redesigned latch mechanism after Flight 96 had not been fully implemented across the fleet. Documentation had been misleading. Warnings had been ignored in the rush to keep production lines moving. McDonnell Douglas engineers had insisted the DC-10 was safe. Turkish Airlines trusted the paperwork. Both were wrong. In the aftermath, every DC-10 in service was grounded until modifications were verified. The system was overhauled again. But for 346 people, the correction arrived a day too late. Even today, pilots remember Flight 981 not as a tragedy of mystery, but of arrogance. The arrogance of believing a warning can be postponed. The crash at Ermenonville became a brutal lesson etched in black boxes and metal fatigue. That aviation safety is written in blood, and every line of the checklist costs someone's life to earn. The forest grew back. Nature does that. But if you walk its trails in silence, you can still see metallic glints among the moss. Fragments of aluminum half swallowed by roots. The sky above it remains calm, the contrails unbroken. And somewhere beyond the clouds, engineers still trace their fingers over the blueprints of the DC-10, wondering how such a small door could open such a vast abyss. If you think this door failure was unforgivable, wait until you see how politics and missiles rewrite the sky. Watch it here now. See you there.